Hello everyone, it was the final round of the British Chess Championships today, so it was round 9, and I thought I'd go through the Michael Adams versus Stephen Gordon game. This is because if Michael Adams wins this game, he would win the British Championships. So in this game, Adams is white, Stephen Gordon plays black. Adams plays e4 once again. He's been very successful with this throughout the tournament. Stephen plays c5, so he gets a Sicilian. Knight to f3 is played, d6. And Adams goes in for this line with bishop to b5 check, and black plays knight d7, and here white retreats the bishop back to a4. So this is quite a rare move. Usually moves like d4, c3 or castle's kingsides are played most often. Stephen now played knight gf6, hitting the pawn on e4, but white just ignores this and castles kingside. So what happens if black takes this pawn? Well, if knight takes, white can play rook e1 and hit the knight. So the knight moves back, let's say to f6. What's white doing here? Well, white can now play d4. So they've sacrificed the pawn to gain a lead in development. If c takes d4, white can recapture with the knight. And black's in a bit of trouble here. This is mainly due to the bishop is pinning this knight, so it's very awkward. And white's getting good chances against the king on this e-file. If e6, white can play knight to b5 and hit this d6 pawn now, with the queen and knight. If black plays a move like queen b6 to defend this, white can just play bishop f4 and use another piece to attack it. So there's no real way to defend this d6 pawn anymore. Even d5 doesn't work due to moves like knight c7 and it'll fork the king and rook. So after knight b5, black should just play bishop e7, but even then, white's winning their pawn back with check. If king f8, white can play bishop to f4, and this is just a very nice game for white now because black's lost castling rights. And after knight c3, white's just fully developed and ready to attack. So for this reason, in this position, black didn't take the pawn. Instead, they played a6, threatening to play b5 and c4 and trap his bishop on a4. But of course, Adams didn't fall for this, he just played c4, stopping the b5 move. And now white controls the d5 square, very nice. And that'll be a perfect square for a knight to jump into. Again, black has the option here of taking on e4, but again, white could play rook e1. After knight to f6, play d4 once again. And if captures, play knight takes. And in this line of e6, white can actually play rook takes e6 with check. This is because if f takes, then knight takes e6 can be played, hitting the queen. And wherever the queen goes, it's good for white, to be honest. If queen a5, white can play bishop to d2, hit the queen again, and prepare moves like knight c7. If queen b6, white can play bishop to e3. If queen takes b2, white can play bishop to d4. And if a move like queen b4, then white can just play moves like knight c3 and prepare knight c7 check, even jump into d4, and play even rook b1 is an idea as well. For instance, if black plays, let's say, queen takes c4 here, then queen e1 is just winning because they've got the nice open file, and the black king is really susceptible to an attack now. For instance, the king's got to move to f7 and we can play moves like bishop to b3. Queen e7 may also be an option here, but then just comes knight c7 with check, and again we're forking the king and rook. It's a very nice game for white. So this all came about if black takes on e4 again. But in the game, Stephen Gordon played e5, keeping it very solid, and perhaps wants to put a knight on d4 for themselves. Adams played d3 in this position, so the plan is simple, to play knight c3 and knight d5, and just hold on to this e4 pawn. Black plays g6, so white plays knight c3, bishop g7 is played. Adams now comes up with a plan, he plays rook to b1, so the obvious move is he wants to play b4 at some point and start weakening black's centre and gain some play on this side of the board. Black castled here, and before Mickey plays b4, he just wanted to stabilise his own position, so he plays h3. I believe this is to stop moves like knight to b6, hitting the bishop, and then maybe black could have played bishop to g4 and pinned the knight, so Mickey didn't want this, so he played h3. And in this position, black's got to come up with their own plan. In the game, knight c8 was played by Stephen. Maybe rook b8 was another idea, so after b4, black could reply to this with b5. And if captures, black can capture on b4, and we get into a bit of a messy position after rook takes b4. Black can play queen a5. After a3 to defend the rook, black can also play knight c5, attacking the bishop on a4. If bishop to e3, black can take on a4, queen takes, rook takes, and a takes b5. Here is a very even position for both sides, so maybe Stephen could have gone in for this rook b8 idea in this position and gained some counterplay against b4. In the game we played knight to e8, maybe rerouting his knight c7, maybe to e6 to d4, I'm not sure. Or maybe he's playing knight c7 and b5 at some point, maybe that was his plan. But Mickey now just plays b4, and because the centre's blocked, play becomes really easy for white now. I'm pretty sure white's plan is not to take on c5, it's actually just to play b5 and gain expansion on this side of the board. But white will only play this at the right moment, maybe when the knight's on d5 so it can support a b6 move and just sort of crush black very slowly. So b6 could have been played here, this was an option. I think white's got a better position now though, bishop g5 hitting the queen. And if f6, white can actually play bishop to c6, hitting the rook. So if the rook moves, maybe bishop h4, bishop b7, captures, take on c5, the d pawn has to take because the b pawn is pinned, and white can play queen c2, if knight c7, play a4, and I feel like white's got this under control, but still this was better than what happened in the game for black, because black's now got maybe knight to e6 and d4 ideas. So maybe in this position b6 was a viable option for black. Stephen instead though took the b pawn straight away, just c takes b4, Mickey captures with the rook, and knight c5 is played by black. So this still looks like a reasonable position for black at the moment. But now white just parks their knight on d5, a very nice outpost for the knight right in the centre. It's going to cause black a lot of issues. Maybe black should have countered this knight move with knight c7 and try and swap it off. I don't think white would have wanted this, so they would have played knight to b6, and black would have had to play rook to b8. If this happened, maybe white could play bishop g5, and again f6 can be played, followed by bishop to e3. But then maybe black can play f5, threatening f4. It's rather unclear. Maybe if white takes on f5, knight takes a4, queen takes and bishop takes f5. This looks like a reasonable position for black. Again, I feel like white has a slight edge, but again this is much better than what happened to Stephen in the game. So maybe knight c7 here was another move that Stephen could have played. Instead he played b5 here, hitting the bishop on a4. White recaptures with the pawn, and in the game bishop d7 was played, but again maybe black should try and get this knight on d5 off the board with bishop to e6. Again white could play b6 here, but after takes and rook b8, black's going to win the b6 pawn back. If bishop to e3 from white, black can capture, and queen c2. Now again I feel like white has a better position here because rook b1's coming up with some nice play, and also white can play bishop to c6 to defend this d5 pawn if black plays knight to f6. But black's dealing with a fighting chance in this position, so maybe again black should have played bishop to e6 and try and take this d5 knight out of the equation. Stephen though, I think he thought he was winning material here with bishop to d7, or at least winning the pawn back. But here Mickey played an amazing move. He just played b6 here. So he allows black to target this a4 bishop with two minor pieces and win the exchange. So in the game, Stephen now took the bishop with the knight, Mickey recaptured with the rook, and black wins the exchange with bishop takes a4, and white plays queen takes a4. So black's won the exchange, but white's got an extra pawn, and this pawn is really far up the board and proves to be very valuable. And black's getting real squashed here because this pawn also guards the c7 square, and it's really hard for this knight to get out now. Stephen now played f6. I think this was to stop maybe bishop g5 ideas. So f6 would have had to be played anyway, and f6 also allows black to play rook to f7 and get the rook out. Otherwise I don't see how this rook's going to get out. If black of course plays knight to f6 here, this should be terrible due to bishop g5, and everything is just locked down for black now. So this is why black had to play f6. Mickey now played knight d2, getting the knight into the game, rerouting it to c4. Stephen played rook f7, so guarding the b7 square, and Mickey played knight c4. So he's got two pieces guarding his pawn. Very nice. And he plays queen d7 here, and Mickey accepts the queen exchange and plays bishop to e3. So this bishop's very nice, got a very nice position, just guarding that pawn. And now rook b1 will probably come next. Black played f5 here, preparing f4, but Mickey sidesteps this with just f3. So if f4 is ever played, white can retreat to bishop to f2, and that's no problem for white. Stephen played bishop to f6 in this position, so probably going to play bishop to d8 to try and stop this pawn on b6. It's very powerful, but Mickey just plays rook b1 and he's preparing moves like b7, and it's going to be very hard to stop this pawn. Bishop d8 was played by Stephen, and Mickey played knight to a5, preparing knight c6. Rook b8 was played and knight c6, attacking the rook. So rook bb7 is the only move. Knight to a5 was played by Mickey. The rook retreats, knight c6 is played, hitting the rook once again. Rook to b7. And instead of repeating moves, Mickey just goes in for the kill with a4. Preparing a5 and just consolidating b6 pawn. King f7 was played by Stephen, and now just a5. And to be honest, black's position looks terrible. There's literally nowhere to move the pieces to. In the game, knight to f6 was played, and Mickey just played knight d to b4, hitting the a6 pawn, and there's literally no way to defend that. This b pawn is really powerful and just stops the rooks from moving into any of these squares, and basically that rook on b7 is just trapped now, because the knight covers b8 as well. So play could continue actually. Maybe black could have gone f4 and bishop f2, and I don't see what black can do now actually. If king e8, white just takes on a6, and let's say black plays g5, white can just take everything in their leisure with knight a to b4, and let's say h6, a nothing move once again, and white can just take on d8. If king takes d8, then just play a move like a6, and white's just going to queen one of these pawns. For instance, if rook takes b6, bishop takes b6 with check. So in this position, black is absolutely lost, and it's fair enough why black resigned in this position. So Mickey actually won this game and is the 2019 British chess champion, and this was a really convincing win against a really top GM as well. It's quite scary. It seems like Michael Adams, even though his rating doesn't reflect it, is still the strongest player in Britain at the moment. Obviously David Howell and Gawain Jones are really close in rating to Mickey Adams, but we just get the feeling that he's still the best player, and these last few games just prove it, to be honest. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed my analysis of this game. Please drop me a like, comment or subscribe to the channel if you want to watch more chess videos in the future, and I'll see you next time with another video.